Imagine an empire so powerful that the Spanish crown sent diplomats, not soldiers. Imagine warriors so skilled on horseback that the United States Army spent decades trying to figure out how to fight them. Imagine a nation that controlled more land than France, with no castles, no cannons, no navy, just horses, arrows, and an unbreakable will. That nation was real. They were called the Comanche, and for over 150 years, they ruled the heart of North America with an iron grip that no European power and no American government could break by force alone. This is not a story you learned in school. This is the true story of the greatest Native American empire that ever existed. And today, we are going to tell it from the very beginning to the very end. To understand how the Comanche built their empire, you first have to understand where they started. In the late 1600s, the Comanche were nobody. They were a small band of people living in the Rocky Mountain foothills in what is now Wyoming and southern Colorado. They were part of the larger Shoshone people. Historians estimate their total population at the time was just a few thousand. They had no horses. They hunted buffalo on foot, which was extraordinarily dangerous. They used cliffs, driving herds over edges. They used fire to panic the animals. They moved slowly across the land, carrying everything they owned on their backs or on wooden sleds pulled by dogs. Life was survival, nothing more. Other tribes around them were stronger, more established, more feared. The Comanche were not a power. They were not a threat. They were simply there. But history has a way of turning everything upside down. And for the Comanche, it happened with 4 legs and a mane. In 1680, something extraordinary happened in New Mexico. The Pueblo people, who had been living under brutal Spanish colonial rule for nearly a century, rose up in a massive revolt. They drove the Spanish completely out of New Mexico. It was one of the most successful indigenous uprisings in the history of the Americas. But there was a side effect that no one anticipated. The Spanish left behind thousands of horses. Those horses spread across the Great Plains, and tribe after tribe began acquiring them, using them to travel faster, hunt more efficiently, carry heavier loads. But the Comanche did something different. They did not just use the horse, they mastered it. Within one generation, perhaps 25 years, the Comanche transformed completely. They moved down from the mountains onto the open plains. They learned to breed horses, to train horses, to fight on horseback in ways that no one else had ever imagined. A Comanche child learned to ride before they learned to walk properly. By the time a Comanche boy was a teenager, they could do things on horseback that trained European cavalry soldiers could not do after years of practice. They could hang off the side of a galloping horse, completely hidden from view, using only one heel hooked over the horse's back. From that position, they could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy. They could change direction instantly. They could reload and fire again before the enemy even understood what was happening. The horse did not just change Comanche life. The horse made the Comanche Empire. With power came territory. The Comanche began pushing south and east onto the southern plains, and every tribe they encountered had a choice: become an ally or get out of the way. The Apache had dominated the southern plains for generations. They were feared warriors themselves, but against mounted Comanche raiders, they were pushed back further and further south and west until they were driven out of the Texas plains entirely. The Comanche did in decades what no one else had been able to do. By the mid-1700s, the territory under Comanche control had a name: Comancheria. It stretched across what is now western Texas, eastern New Mexico, southeastern Colorado, southwestern Kansas, and western Oklahoma. This was not just hunting ground, this was their domain, and everyone who entered it did so on Comanche terms. The Spanish had built missions and forts across Texas and New Mexico. They had soldiers, cannons, and centuries of military experience, but they could not control Comancheria. They tried raiding Comanche camps. The Comanche simply disappeared into the vast plains and returned twice as hard. Eventually, Spain did what powerful empires sometimes have to do when they can't win militarily. They negotiated. In 1786, the Spanish signed a formal peace agreement with the Comanche, essentially recognizing Comanche authority over their territory. Spain agreed to provide the Comanche with trade goods. In return, the Comanche agreed not to attack Spanish settlements. Think about that. One of the most powerful colonial empires on Earth signing a peace treaty as an equal partner with a Native American nation. That tells you everything you need to know about how powerful the Comanche had become. The Comanche Empire was not built only on war. It was built on trade. At the center of everything was the buffalo. The southern plains were filled with tens of millions of buffalo, and the Comanche harvested them with extraordinary efficiency on horseback. From a single buffalo, they extracted everything useful. The meat was eaten fresh or dried into jerky that lasted for months. The hides were tanned into leather for clothing, moccasins, and the large teepee covers that were their homes. The bones became tools and weapons. The sinew became bowstrings. Even the stomach was used as a cooking vessel. Nothing was wasted. And the products of the buffalo trade moved across an enormous network. Comanche traders traveled to annual trade fairs, most famously at Taos in New Mexico, where they exchanged buffalo hides and horses for corn, metal tools, and manufactured goods. At their peak, the Comanche owned somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 horses. No other power in North America, native or European, could match that number. Those horses were currency. They were power. They were the foundation of Comanche wealth. Raiding was also part of the economy. Comanche raiders took horses from Spanish ranches in Texas and Mexico, sometimes driving herds of thousands of animals back across the Rio Grande. Those horses were then traded northward across the plains, spreading Comanche influence across the entire continent. The Comanche were not just warriors, they were the economic engine of an entire region. But when enemies came, or when the Comanche chose to ride to war, they were something that their opponents struggled to describe in words. European and American military observers who witnessed Comanche warriors in battle consistently said the same thing. They had never seen anything like it. The Comanche trained for war from childhood. Young boys practiced shooting arrows while running on foot, then while riding slowly, then at full gallop. They learned to read terrain, to track enemies, to set ambushes in open country where there seemed to be nowhere to hide. A skilled Comanche warrior could ride at full speed, drop down to hang off the side of his horse, fire an arrow under the horse's neck with deadly accuracy, and swing back upright, all within seconds, all while moving at 30 miles an hour across open ground. They attacked in fast-moving waves, striking quickly and disappearing before any organized defense could form. Traditional European military tactics, lines of infantry, artillery positions, cavalry charges, were nearly useless against Comanche hit-and-run warfare. The Texas Rangers were formed specifically to fight the Comanche. In their early years, they suffered defeat after defeat. Only after adopting Comanche-style tactics themselves, riding light, moving fast, abandoning heavy equipment, did they begin to hold their own. And even then, it took decades. In 1840 came the event known as the Great Raid, or the Great Raid of 1840. After Comanche chiefs were killed during a peace negotiation in San Antonio, an event of profound betrayal called the Council House Fight, the Comanche launched the largest raid in Texas history. Several hundred warriors rode all the way to the Gulf Coast, over 200 miles through the heart of Texas. They sacked the town of Linville. They took thousands of horses and mules, enormous quantities of trade goods, and dozens of captives. Then they turned around and rode back home through the middle of an increasingly panicked state. The entire organized military force of the Republic of Texas could not stop them. Great leaders produce great empires, and the Comanche Empire was no different. Ten Bears, whose Comanche name was Parawasaman, was one of the most respected chiefs of the mid-1800s. He was known not only as a warrior, but as a speaker, a man whose words carried enormous weight. At the Medicine Lodge Treaty Council in 1867, when the U.S. government was pressuring Comanche leaders to accept reservation life, Ten Bears rose and spoke. He said he had been born on the open prairie. He had grown up with the wind and the sky. The rivers had given him life. He did not want to settle behind walls and fences. He wanted to live and die free as his fathers had lived and died. The room was silent when he finished. His words changed no policy. The treaties were signed, the reservations were established, but Ten Bears had said what needed to be said, and his speech is remembered to this day. Quanah Parker was the last great war chief of the Comanche, and perhaps the most remarkable figure in all of Comanche history. His story was unlike any other. His mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, was a white woman who had been taken captive by the Comanche in 1836 when she was just 9 years old. She was raised within the Comanche Nation, married a respected chief named Quanah, and had 3 children, one of whom was Quanah. When Texas Rangers recaptured Cynthia Ann in 1860, she did not want to go back to white society. She tried to escape multiple times. She never readjusted. She died just a few years later, some said of a broken heart, separated from her Comanche family and the only life she had truly known. Quanah Parker grew up knowing this history. He became one of the most feared Comanche warriors of the 1870s, leading raids deep into Texas, evading the U.S. Army, refusing to surrender long after most other bands had given up. But Quanah Parker was also brilliant in a different way. He understood the world was changing, and when he finally came into Fort Sill in 1875, it was not as a broken man, it was as a leader with a plan. He would fight for his people with words and law, just as fiercely as he had fought with arrows and horses. The Comanche were never truly defeated in open battle. What destroyed them was far more calculated. The U.S. government understood one thing clearly. The Comanche could not survive without the buffalo, so the buffalo had to go. In the early 1870s, professional hunters flooded into Texas with powerful long-range rifles, not hunting for food, only for hides. In just a few years, tens of millions of buffalo were killed across the Great Plains. The herds that had sustained the Comanche for generations simply vanished. The army didn't stop the hunters, they encouraged them. Without buffalo, the Comanche began to starve. In 1874, the Red River War began, soldiers pushing in from 5 directions simultaneously. At Palo Duro Canyon, they found the last Comanche stronghold. They didn't massacre the people, they burned every teepee, every food supply, and shot over 1,000 horses. Without horses, it was over. In June 1875, Quanah Parker rode into Fort Sill and surrendered. The Comanche Empire was finished. But the Comanche people did not disappear. Today, nearly 17,000 Comanche citizens live in Oklahoma. Their language is still spoken, their traditions still alive. Quanah Parker never stopped fighting, just with different weapons. He negotiated, lobbied in Washington, and protected his people until his death in 1911. He was buried next to his mother, Cynthia Ann Parker. 2 worlds, finally together. The Comanche story is not a story of defeat. It is the story of a people who built an empire from nothing and found a way to survive when everything was taken from them. If this moved you, share this video, follow our page, because more untold stories are coming. The story of this land did not begin in 1776. It began long before.